order is exquisite. It's got emphasis, and it's a reverse emphasis that's actually incised as you would with a metal tool. And you can see that the engraving came through. But Le Corbusier was a fabulous architect, and even late in life, he would build buildings like these. You know, that one is in. He designed it for Chile, I think. But this is his first famous building. And he says this is when he was starting to become a modernist, and he really screwed up. It was unexplainable. This symmetrical building with an asymmetrical plan, the view with a blank thing, etc. And you know, rooms that didn't work. And so you know, it always occurred to me that he had to correct them. By the way, Le Corbusier was quite a good town planner. This is one of his garden cities. If you look at this, I'm editorializing here. But this garden city, coming down a hill, is actually better mechanical, so much more fabulous than Raymond Unwin. You know, you can see he's a great architect. He said, what's important is that we're talking about a really brilliant architect. You know, this kind of thing. And of course, he became obsessed by this kind of stuff. By the way, note the car, great coincidence, etc. He became obsessed by, this is Pierre Charot. By the way, this is a building, a fantastic building in Paris, done in the 20s, that I think should be a classical building. It's steel, beautifully built, by the way, full of metal craftsmanship. This is the Maison de Verre, Pierre Charot, great tile, great concrete, great glass block, etc. He was a great machine aesthetic, and then he goes to denigrate Le Corbusier and say that his obsessions became sicker and sicker, like, you know, the Béton Brut, actually they were all obsessed by the Nazi coastal defenses, the fortresses. Le Corbusier knew very well what traditional architecture was like, including the what's it called, this exercise, the analytique. This analytique actually forms the basis of all his paintings, which, by the way, in Leo's opinion, Le Corbusier is one of the great modern painters of the 20th century, not one of the great architects. And I actually would agree with him. He did many, many paintings, and they're absolutely extraordinary. Leo, by the way, who is a brilliant original genius, actually spends a lot of time copying his paintings, which goes to show you what tradition involves. Like he, you know, and Leo can paint a traditional scene. He can paint a landscape like anybody else, and he also paints the Le Corbusier. His house is full of these Le Corbusier paintings that he did himself. And then the Maison Domino. By the way, this is one of Leo's. This is something we should know. Leo's many drawings is what converted urbanism. These are sarcastic little cartoons. And I think there's a book by MIT. It's called Drawing Architecture by Leon Krier. Out this year, very inexpensive, red cover. And in it are all the 50 to 80 diagrams that explain everything about architecture in almost a cartoonish way. And it should become the fundamental. You know, they're very thick Leon Krier books. But all the cartoons have now been collected in an MIT book that I think should become one of the great textbooks, if not the textbook. And look at Le Corbusier's polemic: bad, good, you know. And this is where he presents, you know, the houses on pilotis, the independent structure, all of these things. Basically, this is the thing. This is the Le Corbusier: good, bad. Okay. And then he says, what Leo says is, this is presented as bad and that is good. And basically what he did is he takes Le Corbusier and reverses it, saying, this is like the bad one that I have to improve. He takes these and says, I've got to make them good. So he reverses the mechanism, the transformational mechanism, and he talks, these are the great diagrams that have converted so many people. And I emphasize, this little book should become almost like the first grade book of the students. He makes fun, and all of these are great points to be made. I don't need to repeat it. They're great points. This is interesting. Did you know that Mies van der Rohe had an interior like this? That when he lived in in his glass house, he was full of traditional furniture, which I actually didn't know. The future of Mies. And he says people come to worship. Look at them praying. This is because this is what's left over of the old civilization.
Andy Warhol and Jeff Koons is the same thing.
Yeah, did they?
Yeah, well, Jeff Koons is having Peter Benoit build stuff.
Yeah, fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. And Leo says that actually traditional architecture is absolutely systematic, and I would say locally it is, not internationally, absolutely systematic. And actually, and in this I can't agree with more, it is actually the most efficient system to design. One of the things that I'm doing, I'm teaching in Miami now, and I'm going to take a little side because it's going to, okay. Rem Koolhaas has written that the Chinese architects are 200 times more efficient than the American architects. And one of the things they do is they get the floor plans, they more or less work with floor plans, with very tight Chinese codes. They go to a magazine, they find a facade they like, they photograph it, they Photoshop it, they straighten it out, they find out who spec'd it, calls up and says, give me a facade 5648. And it's one of the reasons that actually there's so much glass architecture. I'm editorializing here. There's so much glass architecture because all you do is pick up the phone, somebody else details it, somebody else installs it, and somebody else takes the liability. If you do a traditional building, well, you better be there to make sure that the windowsills actually shed the water. And every single junction between two trades, the wood trade and the masonry trade, is your problem. And I've been sued for that. Okay, because some fucker just didn't, you know, just couldn't get the damn window right. Okay? That doesn't happen when you have a glass wall. And I think we have to confront the fact that one of the reasons, we can't just say, oh, glass facades are so horrible. There's a reason why people do glass facades. And if we do not actually understand that classicism has the ability to deliver very, very efficiently, then we're not going to get it. More editorial on my part. I'm teaching these kids to have the Chinese architects be only 100 times more efficient. Okay, I said I want to cut it by half. I want your competitors in China to be only 100 times more efficient. And we actually drew well-proportioned windows, all the well-proportioned windows. Do you know why there are no ugly buildings prior to 1940? Because nobody made a badly proportioned window. You couldn't choose one. Why bother? Not the way they have these grids now in which only 2/3 are badly proportioned. So we went to the books of the 1910s and 20s that have the perfect moldings, which were actually drawn full size in order to be traced, right? Because the classical treatises in the 20s became very professional. They traced the moldings, they traced the columns, you could order them up. We put all that on the computer, and I showed the kids how to do one facade a day. In fact, 3 variations of the same facade a day, and within a week they had actually done a whole series of buildings very, very quickly. Again, the whole thing was about efficiency. The whole thing was beyond good enough. And one of the ways that I was teaching is actually by projecting, by having a CAD job, right? Projecting, and I was going with the light saying, hey Dylan, what do you think? Do you think let's use a smaller window on top. And by the way, do you think this alignment is good? Do you think they should be 3, 3, and 3, or it should be 3, 5, and 3? And by the way, why don't you drop the molding a little bit? Oh, choose the other little fatter molding. So they went through my thinking. They actually could see the professor think and how decisions are made. And one of the things that I tried to do is actually undermine this sacrality of design by telling them, hey, you know what? This is only a little house, okay? It ain't a temple. It isn't the opera house. Can we just cool it? This is a little old house in Boca Raton. Okay, so just calm down and try to do a nice little job. And let's move on so we can have a beer by 5 o'clock. And so the kids all designed this stuff, but what you have to do is, the other professors have made the design so difficult that you actually have to bring it down to what is normal. That's what we were doing. And one other anecdote is important. The reason that arts and crafts disappeared around 1900, and even Boise couldn't get any more work, is that the site supervision was too inefficient for the Edwardian affluence. They had to build South Africa. They had to build India. They had to build capitals everywhere. They couldn't be there saying, hey, could you do this brick a little bit better? And classicism could deliver. They said, could I have 36 columns in Indian limestone, Dorics, and by the way, 24 feet wide. And they would arrive in crates, perfect. And the moldings would arrive in crates. Handmade. Okay, they weren't machine made, they were made in India. But the sheer efficiency of classicism is something we have to put forth. It is the one open shelf prefabrication system we have. But the modernists have closed shelf systems. Okay, so this is the house, Leo draws it, he basically fixes it. This stupid symmetry, this is for the masters, this is for the servants, this stupid idiotic house, and he basically makes it intelligent. So that's the first thing, he makes that house intelligent, You know, the meaningless, the lousy urbanism, he fixes it. This is the first one he did. And, you know, the Corbusier plan that didn't work right, and he fixes it. And then he says, and then he goes on, he says, Le Corbusier even copied it. This idea that it was original is ridiculous. Nothing Le Corbusier did is actually even original. It's just he knew how to hide it. He says, this is the best view downhill. What is that? Let's do it properly for people. And so he very carefully actually redoes the facade. He says, this is actually the bathroom. This is the bedroom. And that's the bathroom. He says, what gives? You know? And he actually fixes it. Like that. So it's a pretty funny lecture. Like, Leo sits there saying, oh.
He was obsessed with hygiene.
What?
The Corbusier was obsessed with hygiene. Everything had to be clean and everything. And he's in his writing all over the place. Like the bathroom makes perfect. It has to be clean.
Yeah, but you know what's wrong with that? He was obsessed with sex too. It was great.
I'm just saying that's why.
Okay.
No,
And by the way, he said that, I forget what this was, but Le Corbusier actually said, he didn't say this, this guy was really good with proportioning devices. He was very good, you know, and it was, I've always found that the proportioning devices is the secret handshake of the modernists who actually would be classicists. It's like saying, we have this secret handshake, I can't do it, I'm not allowed to do it, you know, but, and that's what I found by studying the orders. More Corbusier, he was good at bad sketches, everybody improved, and he shows, by the way, he shows how he teaches very, very quickly what a transfer of proportioning system is as opposed to the modernist mess. You know, this is one of his great drawings that actually teaches the kid immediately what it is to do proportions. There's too much mystification, you know, when you, the way that architecture is taught, and Corbu was really good. And this is, oh, by the way, and this is Corbu actually being classical about the windows that he uses in all of his buildings. He had them worked out. And then he goes on and corrects some very awkward things. This is Le Corbusier building. This is the correction by Krier. And he says, he corrects it. And this is quite famous. This is called the immeuble villas. And they're apartments that actually have, they're L-shaped apartments. Actually, what ultimately Krier loves is the parties are great. The modernist parties are fabulous. First floor, you know, this thing floating, double height space, you know, light coming in down there to the back of it. Great, great stuff. But it says the damn thing looks like hell. And so he redesigns it. He redesigns the immeuble villas. And here you see what they're like, the double height space. And this is where Leo starts coming into his own and actually creating really wonderful traditional buildings. This, by the way, is a model of a single apartment done for an exhibition in 1924. This is a single apartment in that building, double height space, double height exterior, you know, the tree growing through it, and then Leo redraws it. And he says this is what he should have been done if just the talent had been maintained without the ideology. And you can see just the delight, how delightful this is, you know. You can just get into this stuff. Look at this guy here opening the shutters, the balcony within a balcony that looks down, the tree, you know, the beams, but by the way, look at this, like what, and this is what gets me. This is what's great about Leo's architecture now that he's finally figured out how to connect it. Look at how these two arches have different spring points. Right, they're next to each other, they have different spring points. Right? This spring point here is much higher than this one. Nobody teaches this. You actually get the kid to sort of strut it all out and fuck up the plan, and come on. Can we kind of recover the vernacular mind? And this is what he's achieved in his 65th year. This kind of stuff can actually, that it is so tolerant, the architecture that he's developed. He fixes the site plan, and he actually begins to make an urbanism. He says even if you actually retained the modernist architecture, you can actually make a modernist, you can make a traditional architecture. And so he actually creates another piece in which is actually modernist. This is this is fabulous. This is very important to what you're doing here in Charleston. He says that when you do an addition to a traditional building, you're forced to do it in a modern style to differentiate it. But when you do an addition to a modern building, you don't have to do a traditional style to differentiate it, you get to do it in a modern style. You see the problem?
So I win, tails you lose.
What?
Is that heads you win,
Tails you lose, right.
That's what it is.
Yeah, so here's the bad building, and he says, well, you have to restore it, etc.
But that's because of the theory of the zeitgeist, that this is not a zeitgeist, this is not an expression of the spirit of our time.
Right.
So these actually became decrepit, famously so. This is a place called Pesach, very early 1920s, and it's about, I don't know, it's about 50 or 60 or 70 housing units, and it's decrepit, but they were all restored modernist. And he said, what happens if you actually follow the Charter of Venice? And this is just a thing which he says you can actually prove, he always says you can always improve the urbanism, even if you don't change the style, okay? You can always improve the urbanism. And he says, here he shows Pesach and how he would improve the urbanism, right? Pesach existing in the future, right? This is Pesach the way it is, which became decrepit. And then he begins to actually fix it. And he begins to add buildings, right? To actually make an urbanism. This is a whole agenda here. When he completes the thing. But where it gets is when he begins to actually, oh, by the way, look at this. This is so fantastic. This, he creates a city hall or a chapel. That the light comes in, there's a flat roof, and there's a fresco. That actually the light comes around it. So you look through this dark cage of columns to this lit landscape. And this is what's good. He takes these buildings, which are like this, and he begins fixing them. See? And they're perfectly super. There's nothing happening on top. He adds a floor. He just begins going with them. Okay? He begins adding and adding and adding and actually creating an architecture. Now, what I think is extraordinary about these modernist parties is that they're very modern, they're relatively symmetrical, they're very agile, and they give you ideas that you wouldn't otherwise have. You see this building? You may stumble across this, but you're very unlikely to do it if you're looking at the traditional architecture of the 16th and 17th century. If you look at modernist architecture, it actually it develops an architecture that has localized symmetries, big and small spaces, etc. So you get actually the best of both worlds.
So Krier is suggesting that Gary Brewer was privy Corbusier at Seaside?
Probably. And then he does some beautiful paintings, and then the car, and then he fixes it. And by the way, he says, by the way, there's no way that we can do without the ribbon window. We need it. It was a good invention, but it has to be made out of individual buildings. Which, by the way, Boise used to do it. So did Frank Lloyd Wright. And so he takes it and he fixes it. He takes the Corbusier building, fixes it. Fantastic. He takes, that's the floor plan. He fixes it, and he actually goes in and says, "This is absurd." The way that Corbusier would sacrifice the client to conceptual ideas is really stunning. So he always fixes things, and I think this would be a really good exercise for a student. You give him a Corbusier floor plan. You say, "What's wrong?" "Well, you can't see here. The double height space is really mean and small." How do you actually fix a bad parti like this as an exercise? Instead of saying, "Hey kid, why don't you invent it out of nothing?" Which is like, what's that? Like, where's the tension in that? Why not learn to fix modernism? So give him a modernist building as if it were a problem, and have them fix it, and then that tension really teaches them something. Before and after, right? Before and after, fantastic. Before, after. Before and after. He's developing this fantastic vocabulary, which is incredibly forgiving. One of the things about this kind of architecture, unlike I would say the high classicism, is that it's actually more or less six inches. More or less 6 inches. It doesn't matter. The mason can be a slob. It can be up and down a little bit. It's not the end of the world. One of the things that happens with both Messianism and Renaissance classicism is that something that doesn't align up isn't just a little problem. It's a discombobulation of the whole process. And what I find is that with Orthodox classical architecture, it's just too unforgiving for what we have in terms of the current workmanship situation, the available workmanship. Well, this stuff is fantastically forgiving. Not only can it age, and gain patina, but it can actually tolerate bad workmanship. This can't. I know that for a fact. Okay, all this stuff, and then he fixes it. But absolutely delightful. When you get parties like this, like where would you come up with a party like this? You wouldn't, because you can't. Because it's not coming. Your genetic material that you're working with doesn't allow it. This can only come from modernism. And it's fabulous.
Couldn't it come from
The Jew did it.
modernism and other new things? I mean, it wouldn't come from.
I don't think it can come from original architecture. Not even the Wagner school that could do this. Not even. I really think you have to confront first-rate modernism and make it traditional for what it can contribute, which is just much more genetic material. And by the way, the reason traditionalism is really on our side is that the semantics are populist. Right? The floor plans need to be. They need to be this way. The floor plans need to be open, they need to be flexible, they need to have cars, and all this stuff. But the semantics are where they die. People can't stand the look. And so that's almost the perfect combination. I think he's really onto something with this. Look at these parties. Fantastic. What an exercise for a kid. You say, by the way, kid, don't worry. You don't have to spend the next 3 months figuring out a floor plan. Here's the floor plan. You know, go to town. Show what the Ferrari can do at the edge of the precipice. Risk it. You know, just risk it. Instead of just polishing. You know, the analogy I made. Yeah, we've reconstructed the car. Those who reconstructed the car, who restored the car, the first generation of classicists who restored the car, that was incredibly exciting. That was difficult. We figured out how to do it. We found what a carburetor was, and we restored the car. And the car's sitting in the garage. Now we're asking the next generation to come up and say, by the way, come polish the car, this beautiful car, come admire our work, and I'll tell you stories about how we found the carburetor, you know, under the cow dung. Well, you know what? The kids aren't going to do that. Because that car of classicism not only looks good, but it can actually perform. You can take it to the edge of the precipice and amaze the world. There is nothing more amazing than a classical building by Plechnik, because he takes classicism to the edge of the precipice. It's absolutely fantastic. The performance, right? And it's not a video, it's a real building made out of stone on the edge of the precipice. And by the way, the cool thing is that sometimes he falls off and it's a piece of shit. Wow! That's half the time what Gary is doing. He's actually taking an incredible risk. The risk of failure is something that the next generation wants. This business of certainty is not going to get the best minds, and it's not going to get the best. You know, we're not going to have an elite. If all we do is play it safe. He fixes site plans. Corbusier did idiotic site planning as often as he could. All these, see these cartoons? These cartoons explain everything a kid needs to understand. You know what I would do, actually? I would take the 50 cartoons by Krier in a course and say, write up a little essay on what this means. What does this mean? What's Krier trying to say about local architecture? What is Krier trying to say about top and bottom? Just a little essay, write 2 paragraphs, I'll grade you on it. And the kid, instead of being spoon-fed what the idea is, has to figure out what's being communicated here. That course is all the theory they need. And it vaccinates them against modernism. They don't have to do anything else. And by the way, and you can go home early for a beer. That's the best part. The whole idea is excellence quickly achieved. Etc. Fixing it. Okay, this is a house by Corbusier. Leo fixes it. Oh, this is the Salvation Army, which is a fantastic entrance sequence. I don't really know. You enter here, go here. It gets fixed so that it isn't really decrepit. And then he goes ahead and this is the stupid site plan by the Corbusier, which then he fixes. By the way, the stupid site plan, of course, turns into a disaster later. And Leo fixes it with the small blocks. And then he talks about the modular, which he believes in a lot more than I do. He actually thinks it works. I don't think it works at all. Particularly since it worked so badly that the Corbusier had to write 2 scales, one for the Frenchman and one for the Englishman. Because the English were taller than the French. Now, come on. Like, how can you have a universal dimension that doesn't work for 2 countries that are adjacent? The whole thing is completely corrupt. And then the obsession of with the Nazi stuff, which is actually gorgeous, but not what you do. And he goes on like that. And then Chandigarh, the other thing, another example, is to take the modernist site plans and urbanize them. What do? If these are the great civic buildings, like give this to a kid and say, kid, you know, this is just the beginning. what's the next generation going to do? Fill it in with urban fabric. And that's an exercise that has been done since the 1970s. This is 1970. By the way, this is Rodrigo Pérez de Arce. Okay, in my time, Rodrigo Pérez de Arce was a hero. A hero, like one of the best known names, because he took every site plan by the top modernist architects and retrofitted them with urban fabric. The Khan in Bangladesh, the Le Corbusier in India, he took every famous modernist site plan, Boston City Hall, and fixed it. And that was so stunning. That was the ultimate counter project. They were the original counter projects. And by the way, the great thing is he did them in the style of Le Corbusier. Like, for example, this is Rodrigo Pérez de Arce urbanizing the downtown of Chandigarh in the style of Le Corbusier. And he would actually urbanize it in the style of Khan. It wasn't a style battle. It was actually an urban, disurban play. Le Corbusier actually, Le Corbusier, among other things, really did understand, actually, at the end of his life, he understands, he would say, la vie a toujours raison. Life is always right. Okay, and later, his later buildings, like the town center in Chandigarh, actually, and by the way, this is in the 30s, look at this. Look at the little styles of houses filled in here. Okay, and this was from the 30s, the Panabu. And actually, Chandigarh ends up like this. And so he says he's not tricked by life. Eventually he understands that life is always right. And you don't have to go to renovate or beat up on the poor people that change your buildings. And I think this idea of a resilient architecture, somebody said today that the outside is stable and the inside can change. That's not true. The outside also has to actually take additions and modifications and so forth. And I think that as a separate exercise, how tolerant is your building of the changes that history will impose upon it is one of the things that all the kids need to confront. And by the way, let's wait until we actually figure out how to do it ourselves, because we don't yet know how to do that. Obsessions with airplanes, whatever. He takes, for example, the other thing is he takes these buildings, these enormous buildings, and cuts them up into an urbanism. You know, so here's Krier. This is what the Yale students do. When the Yale students this year, he gives them Le Corbusier buildings that are actually anti-urban, and they have to scan them or do a SketchUp on them, and then take the components and make an urbanism. You always separate style from urbanism. I think it's pretty healthy to do that. The governor's palace in Chandigarh, properly done. Look at this guy. Oh God, this is so brilliant. I hate this building, but look at what it gives you. Just look at that architecture there. Look at this arch back there. Look at this arch coming forward on this bracket, and then look at that arch doing like that. I understand, okay? But would you ever have thought of that if you hadn't been confronted with this problem? I don't think so. I think you would have actually reverted to something like, oh, you know, the Basilica at Vicenza. As somebody actually told me, says, why would we do this when we have the Basilica at Vicenza? Well, you know, I don't know what to say. You know, because you know what? Because I'm sick and tired of the Basilica at Vicenza. And so are the young people. They want to see something new, something exciting, something creative. But we have to confront the fact that they don't want to hear about the Basilica at Vicenza anymore. Any more than they want to hear about the dark furniture. At least some of them.
Andrés, go back to
What?
there.
Yeah.
I asked Krier why he puts these big slashes through things.
This?
No, on the plan.
This what?
Yeah.
This hatchet?
No, the big slash in the middle, where it's wider than the other streets, and
This?
yes.
Because it's the main street.
No,
Why?
because he says every city. I asked him, and he said every city needs a Thames, which is to say that this morning Patty took me around Ion, and I got so lost and confused,
Right.
and it needed a Krier slash
Yeah.
through the town so that you can reorient yourself and know where you are.
Okay. Well, actually, that happens in most of our plans.
I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah.
Told me that.
I think most of our plans suffer from that, the DPC plans. I don't think Iron does because of the 2 lanes.
Well, think of every city
Yeah.
needs a Thames.
Right. By the way, in every
Actually,
city,
it does have a road that goes through the
Yeah.
main spine road called Shumway.
you were probably given a really bad tour.
But it has
There was no pattern to how I was driving. I was trying to find you a cup of coffee.
I'm not saying that isn't a problem. Okay, it is a
15
problem,
minutes to show my home.
but it's not a problem in Ion. Ion has to escape.
It is a problem in Iowa.
Well, it's not a big enough slash.
Now you know it's.
When he redesigned New Haven, have you seen that plan?
There's
No.
no main road that says something.
He's redesigned New Haven, it's brilliant, I'll show it to you afterwards. But
Okay,
he kept the railroad cut, which is this big ugly gash, and that's where I first asked him, why did you keep that? And he said, every city needs a Thames. And the Thames is not just a straight line, it's a big wide, big fat thing, it's a simple
Interesting.
park.
It snakes all over the place.
I will take that, not only,
You start
No,
right
no,
now,
no.
today,
tomorrow.
today.
I can't wait till next week. Okay, now there's another thing about Krier. What?
Because I've seen this type of architecture in the Roman Forum. And so, I mean, you
This
were
is
saying,
traditional.
yeah, you were saying that,
It's the town square at Gubbio.
Yeah.
The town square at Gubbio has, it doesn't have the transverse arches, but it has the main arches. It's stunning.
in the Basilica, I forget, of Trajan.
Yep.
It's very similar to this. So, you were mentioning about the students that,
Yeah.
you know, they're tired of hearing about the Basilica Gladiana one more time. But I think that
We
seems
need to
like
go younger because I don't think they're tired of it at all.
they don't.
They're approaching,
They're hearing it.
they're too old.
We agree on the principle that we ought to open up our gene pool
Yeah.
to more material, because there's also, I mean, many other traditions around the world that didn't have.
But we need the nudge. We actually need the thing that creates the curl. Like there's gotta be the same.
But this is also fantastic because it demonstrates in a way you don't even have to explain that classicism is progressive. We are leaving this shit behind. We are building on its grave. We are the
We
future.
don't have to leave it behind, but we don't have to not leave it behind.
Yeah.
But it's fantastic because by incorporating it, we are visibly consuming it. We are taking it into our stomachs, digesting it, and building new classical muscle with the,
And by the way,
with the
these
protein model.
are all counter projects. For example, see this play here of this arch with the light coming in from behind, the way that happens? That kind of reverse thing, that is a modernist trope. So even though, yes, of course, this is, the Romans could and would do this. The stimulus, the sand, the grit is still necessary if we're going to move it forward, apart from the polemic that hadn't been thought of. That we are building something, and we're leaving this in its grave.
I got a question.
Yeah.
Because you mentioned
Yeah.
the Basilica Veneziana
Yeah.
Gladiana. I mean, wouldn't that be an interesting exercise to give them that and say, well, reformulate that with something?
Yeah.
I mean, just like you would with Corbusier.
Yes, that would be interesting.
If the lesson is that
And one of
modernism
the
needs
things that I
repair,
would
we
do,
get it.
how would you do this in a small town with half the budget? Okay, see, that's an exercise. That'd be interesting. It also brings up the discussion, the whole idea of having something to talk about. I don't know if this is- By the way, he was always, he's never done a Renaissance order. It's always highly expressive of something. Either, for example, this is an old civic building from the old days, and it's incredibly open and light. And yet, this is where when I look at who did the museum in Chicago?
With the museum.
The new one. A piano, okay. If you look at the Piano Museum at Chicago, which we drew up for Heterodoxia, and it's got a very tall column with a capital and everything, and people say that's not classical. You know, why do I think it's classical? First of all, it's got a capital and everything else. But this Krier actually opened my mind. You see that, and that, and that, and that. That's what piano did. So he's always broadening the language, just opening it and opening it and opening it. And generally has a lot to do with construction as well. He's very careful about, this. See that log that he uses all the time? That round thing actually resolves beautifully a problem we all have, which is the angle, and how do you take that angle with a rafter and go vertical? He uses a round telephone pole. So this kind of vocabulary, I think, should be entered. Some of it fails, by the way. You know what I love about the Ferrari crashing? Guess what? Do you think that? I think the Ferrari went completely off the precipice here. It just went off the precipice. Boom. Corbu won. Corb won. It's just better. I think Krier lost, and I love that. I love the fact that you risk it and lose. Because it means you really take, this is a render. Fabulous thing. By the way, I post this in the internet. You know, one of the reasons I'm kind of grumpy about the discussion is that I post this stuff and say, and people say, well, it's just a piece of shit. I'm sorry, that's Leo Krier. If you don't grant somebody like Leo Krier the authority to know that, you know what he's doing, then I don't know how we even have a common vocabulary. This is the great one. This is the thing I showed on. Very influential in our work at DPZ back 20 years ago. And just a fantastic spatial quality of the arch. And you know, the Corbusier really did deliver a fantastic, unprecedented urban quality. It's really great. But the thing is, we have to teach. I mean, I thank God that somebody got me excited about this kind of architecture. Because this kind of architecture and what that represents in terms of levels and interior space and so forth has been enormously enriching to my practice. Even though the buildings that I did, in fact, were like this. I've done several houses like this, even before Krier did it. And it's fantastic. The combination of a modernist parti with a traditional vocabulary is really powerful.
So Andrés, can I ask you a question? So, how do you respond to those who say, well, they did arches back then because structurally that's what they had to do. And in the early 20th century we developed new technologies and now we don't have to do that, so let's not do it anymore.
Okay, what he said is, the Nazis built 900 bridges. Okay. Some of them are trade-gated construction, 500 tri-gated construction, concrete. They all have to take it down. And they did others that were concrete and arch construction. They're all still there without exception. He says actually even concrete actually hates having that corner shoulder. And that's his explanation. This is structure anyway. It's better even for concrete. I mean, from mud to concrete, this is the way you span a large road.
So that's an interesting, I mean, I'm making the tectonic argument here because that's the one that the modernists use as the most powerful one. That we have a new tectonics that's based on a new construction technology. We have to throw the old stuff out.
And actually, you know, Krier's answer was told, you know, Fritz Scholl built all the Ottoman bridges, and all the ones were built in those weren't. So for me, that was a whole aha moment I had 2 days ago. It still works better, even with concrete.
Can you go back to the slide, the rendering of the buildings that had the two figures in traditional Indian dress?
Yes,
Yes. There's something else that's actually extremely nice about this photograph, is that no one, not a single person, can argue that these people have been stamped on by an export Western classicism.
Yeah.
Because this is not anybody's orthodoxy. This is not an imperial footprint by any monster I've ever met.
Yeah.
This is the temple of David Roberts.
Right. He's absolutely right. But, by the way, David Roberts was a renderer who went around the British Empire, or Turkey and India, right? And did renderings this way, in this fantastic color. Yep. This. Oh, one more thing, if I may ask you. Okay, so how do we teach the kids to draw? Most kids fail to learn to draw because we teach them to aspire to be marvelous renderers, like Michelangelo. You know, the end result is to draw like an angel. And so most of them don't reach that. What if you just teach them to draw like Krier, okay, which is a much lower threshold? Everybody in my office can actually draw a tree like this, a palm tree like this, and do a wiggly line like this, and it's all compatible. This level, if this level were achieved, you'd have somebody that can actually draw. Yeah? How does Krier learn to draw? You figure it out.
His drawing style is actually very similar to theirs.
He does a drawing style. There's a couple of people. Back in the 70s, there was a whole series of people which appear in Architecture Rationale 1978, in which people had agreed to draw in the same manner, so that the multiple work could add up to a city. And one of the things that we did at DPZ, and it's weaker now, is we taught everybody to draw the same, so that you could do a render, you could do a tree, you could do a tree. We also have the same colors for the board, and so we have a coherent product. But the main thing is that this, you see this thing, you sit somebody down and say, okay, you get a pen and you press down a little bit and you do a nervous wiggle. And then you do a line and you keep lifting it like that. Stay steady like that. It's not hard. But you know what the trick here is? You do it very small and then you blow it up. And then every human imperfection. We usually do the big thing, and then we shrink it and all the details are gone. They glom together. And they get very rigid. So all his work is done in a desk this size, 8.5 by 11, or whatever the A3 is. So these are versions, exercises and versions of this wonderful tropical architecture. By the way, this is for the climate, not unlike Charles. And then he fixes the floor plans. They're actually delightful. They really work. And I don't know what he had that. These are early houses. Look at this order. Okay, so right now, I'm talking to Catherine, who's building a house that actually has superimposed orders. And so what we've been taught is it's going to be Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian, and good luck working out everything, because each of them has its own rules, and somebody said that it had to stack up. And actually, I say no. Look what Krier does. He gets two parallel lines like this, and just goes up in one shot, he clips them, and they're all Dorics. Okay, let's go home and have a beer because we finished in 10 minutes. Okay, but if you're going to say, no, it's got to be worked out according to Palladio, well, let's settle in for 2 weeks. Okay, because that's very hard, stacking 3 orders so that it works. And by the way, it's not like your section is going to work ever anyway. It's a fiction that nobody gives a shit. Okay, so he did it. And then I mentioned this, and somebody said, actually, the temple of X and X, the Greek temple, one of you guys, just said, actually, that exists in classicism. There's a Greek temple that does this. And I basically stamped my feet and said, why didn't anybody teach me? Why didn't they teach me this shit? You know, I really resent that. I spent so much time wasted trying to do this Doric Ionic I never believed in anyway. You know, when actually there's this way. So here you have different modes. You have the easy, fast, let's go have a beer mode, it's only a house. Or another mode, which is actually, let's do it like the grown-ups did. But there's a distinction. It's not always the same, you know, highest level. And that distinction is invaluable.
Andres,
Yeah.
you could learn about stacking orders from New Orleans. They still do the Ionic on top of the Doric or the Corinthian on top of the Ionic, but they don't really have an entablature in between the orders. It's just it's a balcony edge, and it's treated kind of like a real small, thin entablature, but the main entablature is on top of the building, and it's scaled for the double height. And
Well, that should be taught.
yeah,
But the
I think
Romans
that
were
actually
back
learning New Orleans rather than Rome or some book.
you
is
don't
actually-
have having a lineup.
We need to teach it.
Oh my God, I just can't help thinking of
Triglyphs
these.
and manatees.
I'm sorry, I know this is unfair, but the guys in the bow ties with this accent, you know, well, this is the way we did it in the forum. I just can't stand the thought of the way classicism is taught. You know, with the bow tie and the orotund accent. Come on, let's just stand in front of a place in New Orleans while having the beer, because it's actually possible to drink outdoors, and let's do it.
One of the things that
We have an American vernacular that's much more practical.
you're actually echoing Obesan. You're talking about a certain hierarchy of building.
Yeah.
You're actually, in a way, more correct than a lot of
Yeah.
more formulaic classicism is.
Yeah.
Because you're saying that there's the top, and that's reserved for the top. That's, if you really want to do
The
it.
best.
Right.
Good, better, best.
Right, and then what you're saying is if it's a house, you can just basically have beer.
Yeah.
Eventually. And then, you know, maybe an office building is somewhere in between.
Yeah. By the way,
You're
go
actually
have a
echoing-
beer. Go have a beer is a way to communicate with young people. You understand exactly what you're talking about. You know, this is a way of saying, let's do it easier, let's move. But above, you know, I get people in my office at the University of Miami, and I say, could we please calm down? It's only a house. Let's not actually, you know, make people suffer about this. By the way, I don't ever want a side elevation ever designed A front, yes. Side and back, forget about it. Okay, just whatever the bathroom says it wants. You know, and that kind of thing is like absolutely stunning. It will actually resist it. They'll spend a whole day designing a side elevation. Who gives a damn? Etc. So anyway, look at these parties. Oh, by the way, look at this wonderful. If you got this house with Le Corbusier, in which the space actually, the two double height spaces actually flow this way, and then the columns go up and form a roof that shields everything. Do you know what this is? Why would you want to do a container house when you did this? The thing about the container houses that get people incredibly excited is that it can actually do this kind of stuff. Let's do it like that, we put something on top. By the way, we've got to deal with the container houses, because these poor kids are fascinated. They're such paupers for actually an architecture they can do that they now have turned the container house into a kind of icon. Well, this is a way. You don't have to do a container house. You can make it out of masonry, and it's just as exciting. So this, you know, this building. It's a terrific building, but look at it. Pulling this there forward. Fantastic. Look at that floor plan. You know, give me 3. A, let's go have a beer. He takes the rigidity of the Corbusier.